Armando Lacerda, and welcome to the Rebel Base, right? We are here meeting at the Rebel Base today, Star Wars Base. So, like Chris said, I'm a Microsoft MVP, which is an award that's given to people who like to do these things that I'm doing now, and Chris is doing too, which is contribute to the community and help everybody get better on Microsoft and technologies and understand how they work and how to put things together. I have multiple certifications from Microsoft. I've been a Microsoft certified professional since 1984. I've been working with databases for over 30 years and started as a developer. And I've been focused on the data platform for that long, specifically on SQL Server, moving to SQL Server back in 1997. So it's about 23 years in SQL Server. And in Power BI since inception. I've been working with Power BI for over 5 years actually, and it's a very exciting product. This particular I was about to say session because I usually am in a conference, so it's a session, a conference. But this particular presentation here, I put it together based on some use cases that I had with some clients. And specifically on one of these clients. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention, I'm from Brazil, originally from Brazil, and I have a lot of friends down there in Brazil. They're actively working on solutions and systems there too. And I help some of a few of them from time to time. And this particular session, like I was saying, was out of a case down from Brazil where they want to do real life dashboards based on IoT data, data collected from IoT devices. So George Costa, who is another MVP, a good friend of mine down there in Brazil, he's the IoT specialist guy. So we put together our minds, and we delivered the solution to that client. And during that time, I put this session together here to share some of the things that were implemented. So our agenda for tonight is, by the way, you can connect with me through my email. This is my email for my domain. I do have a website in there that I don't touch like in 3 years, so don't look at the website. It's just a big picture of my big head, nothing interesting there. But if you want to follow me along on LinkedIn, I post somewhat regularly there on LinkedIn with technical articles. I work with Wintellect, and we've been doing a lot of data projects, and all my peers there at Wintellect, every time they post something, I repost. So you may find something valuable if you follow me on LinkedIn. There is a Twitter too. I tweet from time to time, not that much, and the other certifications, MCT and MVP. All right, so I'm running this thing from my virtual machine up in Azure. So I just realized that I have redone this virtual machine here a couple of weeks ago for a SQL Saturday presentation. I did not install Office. So I'm presenting my slide deck from the browser, so please don't mind that. Yeah, so our schedule, our agenda for tonight is understanding how Power BI works in terms of live data and understand its limits and how we can leverage that on more enterprise level, robust level for near real-time dashboards, right? And we're going to see the basics of Lambda architecture and some variances of Lambda architecture and how to implement that Lambda architecture using some of Azure services. It could be a few others, but some of the Azure services in there. All right, in regards to questions, I will give you some time, some openings as we move along. But if you have any questions at any time, you can put in the chat window. Chris can help me out, monitoring the chat window. Not be doing that, to be too distracting. But if you want to jump in the microphone and ask a question, it's fine too. I have no problem. You're not going to be rude by interrupting me, all right? So Power BI, right? The starting point for this presentation to understand how the dashboard works is understanding Power BI itself and a particular feature in Power BI. So let's take a look at that one. I'm assuming that you are somewhat familiar with Power BI, you have seen Power BI before. and you know that to work with Power BI, and I believe that one is here. Let me see, Power BI. No, I wiped out the machine completely. Not even Power BI desktop is here. So to work with Power BI, you usually start with Power BI desktop. Most people nowadays, they start with Power BI desktop. What most people don't know, because Power BI is that is being around for that long, is at the very beginning there was no Power BI desktop. It was just Power BI in the cloud. So nowadays the best practice is to start using Power BI desktop, model whatever you want, and then push to Power BI service up in the cloud. And from there, you start distributing your work, right? You create your reports, your dashboards, you validate them, and then you start publishing them as apps to your audience. When you do this way, which is the recommended way, right? That is the recommended way. You can bring data, you can set up Power BI to bring data into the data repository in two ways. One is called import, and the other one is direct query. Under the hood, what's really happening inside Power BI is that it's leveraging a SQL Server service called Analysis Service. Even when you run Power BI Desktop, and you know what, let me download Power BI Desktop here just quick. Supposedly it's not going to take long. Let's see here. Where is it? Power BI Desktop. Download. 3 clicks to download the thing. And hopefully it will come. Maybe there. Yeah, so when you run Power BI Desktop, it starts up behind the scenes. It starts up Analysis Service on your own computer. And when you push your work to the cloud, that Analysis Service is also supporting Power BI in the cloud service, right? Regardless if you're using Power BI Premium or Power BI Embedded, the backing database engine behind Power BI is Analysis Service, which means that data will have to be fed into Analysis Service from time to time. If you have a Pro subscription, Power BI Pro subscription to your account, you can refresh a particular data set up to 8 times a day. So, or 8 times a day for a Pro. If you go Premium, which the entry point is $5,000 a month, you can do every 30 minutes, so 48 times a day. And to some people, when you talk to some people, they actually, and even when you listen to some presentations out there, they say that this is close to real time. Well, 30 minutes delay, for IoT scenarios in particular, it's not even close to near real time, right? So import, which is the traditional way that you get data inside Power BI so you can present that data, really doesn't meet the expectations, doesn't meet the needs. The other way around is to do direct query. And the thing with direct query is, unlike import that brings the data into Power BI, direct query never stores the data into Power BI. So what ends up happening inside Power BI is the Analysis Service engine is just not used, is put aside. And every time someone plays with something in the Power BI dashboard or a Power BI report, it sends a query back to whatever source it is to collect the data and refresh the new data from in the Power BI front end. So that's really close to near real time, right? But you lose all the benefits of compressed and column store data that exists in Azure Analysis Service. And actually, your service is going to be really slow because it will depend on whatever data engine is behind the scenes you're collecting the data from. So like if your database is on-premise, Power BI will have to use a gateway to go into your on-premise database, run a select statement, travel that data up to Power BI service, and render the visual that the user will see. So this sounds like near real time. It's actually querying whatever live data is in the database, but it's very limited and usually very costly, especially if you're working with data that has some volume behind it. There's a couple of gigabytes and things like that. So, so direct query is not an option either for near real-time dashboards. And most people are aware of these two features. We have just these are the two most talked and documented features that are out there in Power BI. And the reason for that, like I said, is because most people start with Power BI Desktop, and in Power BI Desktop, that's the only thing you can see. Those are the two options you can see. But there is a third option to create data sets in Power BI that's called the streaming data sets, this guy here, the streaming data sets. And the thing with the streaming data set is you cannot create a streaming data set in Power BI using Power BI Desktop. You have to go to the Power BI portal, to the Power BI service. And back to my first point that I mentioned, in the beginning, Power BI was just a service that could be accessed through the web portal. And getting to develop things in Power BI became kind of a hurdle, because the web back then was not that robust. The features we have today, they were not available back then. And there was a limitation, like if you need to get the data, you have to push your data through your web browser. So there were some limitations back then in bandwidth and all of that they decided, you know what, it's better to have a way to do things offline through the Power BI desktop application and then just upload to Power BI service. But as a matter of fact, the full features you can use from Power BI can only be set up, accessed, and deployed through the Power BI portal. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to use, we're going to do streaming data sets through the Power BI portal, because it cannot be done through Power BI desktop. Now, what's the streaming data set? I should have illustrated this one here better. But in both cases here, on the import and the data query, the direct query, on both cases here, Power BI is the one initiating the communication. So like when it's time to refresh the data set, Power BI will look into the data source specifications and will connect to the data source and pull data into analysis service, right? Power BI is going to import the data from, or bring the data from the data source into itself. The same goes for direct query, but for every interaction the user practices with the visuals. In Power BI Stream, on this option here, is the other way around. What ends up happening when you do Power BI streaming streaming data sets is Power BI opens up a REST API endpoint, and it just waits for applications to send data to Power BI. And when that data is sent, that's why the idea in the name of streaming, data is streaming into Power BI. When that data is sent into Power BI, Power BI accepts that data. If it's, you can put some security around it. I'm not going to go work with demonstrate much of the security here today, but you can go put some security around it, authentication. But the point is, you push the data into Power BI, and Power BI triggers a bunch of events internally to display that data that had just arrived. And very important to understand too that it feels like real time. The data has arrived, and Power BI works in refreshing the data, so it sends all the triggers and the signal arm events to Power BI on a browser, so people can see that change in a browser right away. But of course, there is a delay, right? So technically, it's more correct to say that's a near real-time thing. Within the Power BI engine, it can take a second to refresh, and it can take a little longer for that refresh signal to get to your browser, and you see that that information showing in your browser. So there we go, right? This is the idea of streaming. Streaming is the opposite direction of the regular data set. Streaming, Power BI does not go out to collect data. In the streaming, Power BI waits for applications to come in and send data, put data into the data set. So that data set that gets created into Power BI it doesn't go into analysis service because analysis service really doesn't work well on this kind of a scenario, to get the streaming data coming in. What we're going to see as we move along here is we will have the option to create either a push or a streaming data set. There is a third option called PubNub for the streaming data set. That's for compatibility with a particular SDK. There was, original one. It's kind of a well-known on some business niches, but not that popular with my cases here. So kind of ignore that other one in there, and we're going to work with these two here, the streaming and the push. These are the recommended ones for new projects. The idea of the streaming data set, Power BI streaming data set, the idea of the streaming option of it, because you have push and streaming, so like double streaming. But the idea of the streaming is data will come, hit the data store in Power BI, the data set in Power BI, and that data will be short-lived inside Power BI. There will be a cache that's not that much of a cache, a big cache. And what's is going to happen in there is the data will hit that cache and will almost immediately refresh a dashboard. And that's the beauty of the streaming data set, right? This particular streaming option in here. The time to refresh a visual in the dashboard is almost instantaneous. On the other end, we have the push streaming data set, the push model. And in the push model, what happens is that cache becomes more robust. Actually, Power BI spins up a SQL database that you can't see. You cannot select from it. You cannot send any query to it. It's just to support this. And data is kept for a little longer, right? It can be, there will be more elasticity on the cache. So you can have a few more data rows, collection of data in there, to a gigabyte, and a few million rows in there until you start dropping off things that are old. And it will stay there for longer, for about an hour. I think it's about an hour. So it will stay there for longer. And another important thing about the push one is in Power BI, we do have an option. We do have the option to create Power BI reports and Power BI dashboards. So there are two different things, right? Reports and dashboards. When you use Power BI desktop, you can only create reports and you upload your reports to the service. When it gets to the service, you can create the dashboards in a service. Dashboards are usually individual visuals, right? Simple visuals where you want to show data. And usually they point to reports, but they may not, right? Which is the case here. When you do a streaming data set, you can only create dashboards. You can only show that data in dashboards, not in reports, but they are updated pretty quickly. When you do push streaming data sets on the push model, you can create reports, right? That's the main difference in between these three guys. So let's take a look. I have spoken a lot about these concepts in here. Let's see how they actually work. Let's see them in action. So let me get here to the portal. Here's my portal. I got here an account from WinTellect. This is my sandbox at WinTellect. And I have already created a workspace here for us, right? So this is my workspace. The workspace itself is empty. I got no dashboards, no reports, no workbooks. I got nothing, right? It's pretty empty. So if I want to go ahead, I can come in here and create something new. Like I said, I can create a dashboard right from here. Let's do this. Demo streaming dataset demo. Let's go ahead and create a dashboard in here. My dashboard is pretty empty, and I can start creating things into my dashboard, right? I can add a tile, and if I had reports, if you have worked with Power BI before, if you have reports, you would just point to a tile from your reports and add them in here in your dashboard. Or, like I said, you can work with this one in here. These are all these options here are just for decoration, external content. And we have this one here, which is real-time data, which is my streaming data set. So I can start setting up my stream data set right from here, or I can also, cancel this one here, go back to my dashboard, and I can say, you know what? I want to create a streaming data set right from here. It's more evident here through the new look and feel of the Power BI portal. On the traditional one, you would have to go to the dashboard or click on a new option that wasn't here. In any case, I like this design, and here we are. These are my 3 options I just explained through the slide deck, right? So I get the API, the Azure Stream, I get the API, I get the PubNub, and I can also have the API through Azure Stream. Now, if you're familiar with Azure, you probably have noticed this link, this icon here before. If I go here to images, google.com, and do here stream analytics, Azure icon, you see that they look alike, right? they look pretty alike. And the point in here is, if you are going to stream data from Stream Analytics in Azure, instead of creating an API and do all the wiring in between the 2 services yourself manually, you can just click in here and point to your Stream Analytics service and have your dashboard receiving data from the Stream Analytics, which is another option I will discuss later, right? So for the sake of this demo, we are going to fix here on the API. And here in the API is where I'm going to create my data set. So this is like temperature sensor. And here, you're going to see that is the feeling of creating a table, because, a data set, a regular data set in Power BI, is a collection of tables and they relate to each other. But for the streaming data set, what we actually have, it's a data set with only one table where people will be sending data in, right? So there will be no multiple tables in there. It's going to be just one table. So here I go with the fields. So let's say here temperature, and temperature is going to be a number. Let's say humidity is also going to be a number. And let's say here sensor ID will be a text. And for time series, we're going to have here timestamp. Cannot type timestamp. There we go. Timestamp, which is going to be date and time. It will help me out later with the series, the time series. So as you can see, the data options we have here, they're pretty simple, but they're the fundamental ones, right? We have numbers, we have text. Data can do math with. Data is just for illustration or identification, and the specific, the special type of data that is the time related, right? The time dimension related. So, for simplicity, this is the data set I'm creating. Notice that I'm not connecting to a table was sourced any other place, right? Like I said, we are creating the table to receive the data in Power BI, right? So this is the actual one in Power BI. Down here on this little toggle in here is where it reads historic data analysis. Let me see if this one here works. Let's see. Nah. Oh well, right there. There we go. So I'm using a presenter that usually goes on a projector. I'm using here with the monitor. Not bad. So you see this historic data analysis in here. This is when the streaming data set goes from just streaming with a short cache into a SQL database backed table, right? With more memory, let's say that, right? With more space to store data and for a longer time, not for a short period of time, but for about an hour. So if I do this one here, Then I can create reports based on this data set. If I make keep this off, I can only create dashboards, right? What's my pointer here again? I can only create dashboards. If I want to create reports with this streaming data coming in, I have to turn this guy here on, right? So I'm going to turn it on so you can see that working as well. And we go ahead and create. And that's about it. That's all there is about creating a streaming data set. The streaming data set is there. The REST API endpoint is right here. See, it's funny because it still says beta, although this thing is in production, but it still says beta. It's not preview. It's not a preview feature. It really, it's is backed by SLA. And this is the JSON payload that this endpoint expects, based on the descriptions. Come on, what happened there? Based on the descriptions I have just ended, and this, of course, just mocking data there, just sample data to show up. So this is the JSON that a developer would have to program to send, to build up and send to this endpoint. Or there is a sample here to do this by curl. Or because this is Microsoft, there is also a sample here to do Power BI. And because everything here is about Microsoft, I'm an MVP and we are using Microsoft products, we have gonna have some fun here running this Power BI script to send the data to the data set. So done, my data set is created. I have here now a dashboard that I had created before, and the newly created temp sensor data set, which is streaming data set. Let me go ahead and open up Power. So many powers in my mind. I'm like, which power I'm talking about here? Power Suite, Power Flow, Power BI, Shell. So let's get this guy here running. And let's have here a text editor so people can see this better. All right. So there we are, right? This is the string with my endpoint. That endpoint we have seen over there. Right now, there is no authentication in place, like I mentioned. So anyone with this text, this string here can push data into my Power BI streaming. This is the JSON file, right? The payload that's going to be sent. So, sensor ID here, let's say is going to be living room, and whatever timestamp goes in there. And for humidity, let's say I do have one in there. It says that 39% humidity, and temperature right now here is 72. All right, quite comfortable. And I'm ready to send that payload to Power BI. Power BI is ready to receive that payload, but it's not showing that payload anywhere. So let's put this here on the side for a second, and let's get something in Power BI to receive and show that data. So let's again go back here into the streaming, into the dashboard, and let's try to add that tile again. So let's go in here, add a tile. And we're gonna do a title based on the real data, right, from streaming data. So let's go next. And as you can see, I could have created the streaming data set right from here, but I have already created it. So this is my guy. I'm gonna collect this one. Next. The data set I have created is the push data set. So I can create report on that one. I'm gonna go there and create a report in a second. But when you create a tile in a dashboard, regardless if it's a streaming data set or push data set, regardless which way we're talking about it here, from here, you only have these 4 visuals you can choose from, right? This is the only, actually 5, this is the only 5 visuals you can choose from. And that's the important thing to keep in mind, because if you're creating if you want to create more a richer or more appealing visual elements to show your streaming data, you have to create a streaming data set that is a push model. So then you can go into the report and consume from that data set. Otherwise, you won't be able to, right? So these otherwise this will be your options, just these 5 options in here. So for simplicity, let's go for a card and let's add the value we want to show in the card. So what fields do I want to show in a card? So let's say I want to show temperature. And because the card is just whatever information you put in there, this is what's going to be shown in a card. And a title for this guy. So my stream dataset card. No subtitles, fine with that, and apply. So now it's there. My stream dataset is there. My card is there. We have no data into that dataset yet. So, it's empty. There's nothing showing there. So let's send some data in. So here's my data. Let's run this script. Here's my script, right? Let's run this script that will send the payload to Power BI. If I minimize here, bang, right there. My title has my title, right? Just showed my the data that came in. So let's say the temperature had some variance in there. Now it's 75. 74.6 is going to round up to 75. And we run this guy again. And that should show there. Will show there momentarily. You see, sometimes it takes a little while. And did it? Oh, sorry, I did not change. 75. That's going to be better. Run 75 cents and 76 round up sent over there. All right, and like I said, because this is a push data set, streaming data set, I can come here and create a report, a regular report. Paginated report is another topic, right? That's the ones that use, somewhat compatible with reporting service. So that doesn't support streaming data sets. But select the data set to report and is having some trouble to reading from the service at the moment. Usually it doesn't take this long. We'll wait. Or not. Meanwhile, any questions there in the chat window? No, kind of quiet. Are you guys there? Or am I talking to? Okay, you're there. I see a bunch of people there. Perfect. Minimize this one. And let's start to create a report from here. Okay, there we go. Now I have it here. So from here, I can go ahead and create a report. And let's say, I want to do like a line here, a graphic like this. So my temperature is the line I want to show. And date and time will be my axis, timestamp right there. I was expecting to see more than 1 point. For some reason, my first 3 points, they went away. So let's send some more data in there. So I should see a flat line there coming up at some point. Let's push this here to the dashboard. File, save, report demo, save. So there we are. And let's push this to my dashboard, my streaming dashboard. And now if I look here into my dashboard, I should see my reporting here too. Yeah, live demos are like that. Sometimes they don't work. I should have seen a line coming up in here with the 3 sets of data we have sent. Actually, more than 3, about 5 or 6. I'm gonna do one more here. Just try it once again. Yeah, I got it here, but for some reason it's not showing and not updating on the report. So the documentation says that the report can take up to 5 seconds, and I have seen it getting delayed a little sometimes, but not as bad as this. It should be there already.
Armando,
Right,
do you need to change the timestamp for the new points?
the timestamp, like if I get in here, where's my report? This is the report. And come on, let's get to the report. And in here, I should have an option to edit this guy. There we go. And this is my guy here. My axis is the timestamp.
Maybe when you're sending the data in through PowerShell, you have to change it.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. They're all in the same time. So great. Let's get something here, 7.1. So this is like next second and next seconds. I should have a call there to daytime. Let's minimize this one here. Well, still did not move. Well, we have another way to see this. If I get this guy here and I get this guy in here, yeah, I can see the data flowing in with distinct seconds going on in there, but they're still not showing here. So something tricky going on in here. I'm not gonna troubleshoot that, but we can see the new data coming in. Sounds good? All right, thanks. Back in here. So let's. So that's the basis of creating a live dashboard in Power BI, right? You create your streaming data sets, you set up with the structure of the data that's coming in, and you start creating multiple tiles. It's different from creating a regular report, because in a regular report you usually get multiple tables on the data set. And in this data set here, on the streaming data set, you cannot really have multiple tables in there, right? It's going to be one table, and your applications would have to send the data, all the data that's necessary. You want to present to that only data set that's there. Come on. There we go. So some limits to be aware of: your tables cannot have more than 75 columns, and you cannot have more than 75 tables or data sets in there. 10,000 max rows per single post. So when you push data into the data sets, you have these limitations in here. When you see this one here, see a particular data set cannot get more than 1 million rows per hour. And when I present on this one here, some people are like, oh, that should be enough, right? Say, yeah, not really. On some IoT scenarios we got in there, we have seen like hundreds of millions of rows per minute, because there are so many devices over the factory. So this is a big limitation in Power BI. So when you get to enterprise level live dashboards, you need to add extra Azure services with Power BI, so we can funnel to the limitations. You can adapt to the limitations in Power BI, and that's coming up on this last final stretch of the presentation. But it's important to read the documentation to make sure you are aware of these limitations in here, so we don't get frustrated, right? I see a lot of people getting frustrated when creating these dashboards and these live tiles, because they they just assume the data will be allowed in. Some other limitations. Actually, this is the comparison between push, streaming, and PubNub, right? PubNub is the more restricted one. Like I said, the push one, you have 1 request per second, up to 16 megabytes request in the time frame, while here you have 5 requests per second, but only 15 kilobytes per request. So it's more limited, like I said, because the buffer is also limited. And 1 million rows per hour, and here it receives, displays, and goes away, so it doesn't keep memory. And don't get fancy in your designs about the SQL database supporting the push streaming data sets, because you don't have access to that. You cannot take a backup of those things. So the data is really volatile. It's going to vanish at the time when it's designed to vanish. Okay. Like I just mentioned, we have these limitations in Power BI in terms of the data you can send. So when you have cases when you're going to present way more data than Power BI, or way more rows, right, or data points that Power BI can receive in a second, you have to resort to some architecture design. And of course, these problems, they have been solved before, right? Other people have been doing this for a long time. So there are two main options you can use. One is the Lambda architecture. There is another one that's being suggested as a less complicated one called the Kappa architecture. You can take a look on the Kappa architecture too. They're playing with Greek letters, right? So, like in the English alphabet, you have KL. So Lambda is L and K is before Lambda. So it's like simpler one, or a step back from the Lambda approach. But the idea of the Lambda approach is this one here. You get data coming in, and from your sensors, from stock market, from any kind of a streaming set that's pushing data in, and ideally you would get that data into Power BI right away. But because the amount of data coming in here is way larger than what Power BI can process, you're gonna implement services in the middle to throttle that information, the cadencing of that information. And the Lambda architecture teaches or suggests that we should have get that data replicated in two, and have two lanes to process that data. One lane was what they call the speed lane, which is going to be this orange one here in the bottom. And the other one is the batch lane. That's going to be the one here up top. So like the batch lane, as the name suggests, the data will come in, will be stored for a little while, and then processed in a batch and to be displayed later. So the batch lane, it's really not near real time, right? It's really time delayed. It can be very delayed. While the one that really interests to us is of interest here for us is the speed lane, right, and the purple one. So you store that data someplace in some Azure service, and we're going to explore some options for that one in a second. And here on the processing of that data, as the data arrives according to your schedule, on the speed lane, what you usually do is when you are working with near real-time data, you don't want to refresh or show data that is within your normal boundaries. You just say, data is fine, and you keep a status there. Like if I don't hear anything, it's good. No news, good news, something on those lines. So what you're doing here on this discrete processing is actually looking for the data that it really pop up on the screen for people to notice, and they can have action on that one. On factory floors, for instance, what we usually do is when we have vibrations or temperature goes above some threshold, then we send the data across, right, to the next step in here. Otherwise, the data is just discarded because it's either normal or irrelevant. So people are not much aware, interested in see what data is coming in there. On the batch one, what's going to happen is, data has been accumulated here for a while, and then the batch is going to take, the batch process is going to take that data, crunch that data, using machine learning algorithms here for analysis and displaying inferences in the data. It's very common to see. You get that one here, regardless which lane you go, you store that data somewhere else too. Because this is your final data, that's you maybe use this one here for your auditing, to go back in time and see what you have displayed on either lane. And then you go into the piece of code that will actually push that data into Power BI, as we have just seen, right? So this query one here would be like that PowerShell script that's getting the data from not the sensors straight anymore, but from the storage that's being, that you came to choose. Some implementations of that could go like this. And my query here got really weird. I think it's because I'm doing the browser. So here's an example of it, right? I can use Azure SQL Database for batch processing, right? So I get well, from the beginning, right? So I have event hubs, Azure event hubs collecting, streaming the data from the IoT sensors or whatever other streaming you're working with into Azure services. I have a function in here that we get that data and write on a batch, on SQL batch for later processing, and apply the discrete processing here to make sure the data, to verify if the data is relevant. If the data is relevant, go into in-memory tables in SQL Server in order to have code that will push that into the Power BI streaming data sets. Now, the tricky point here is this one, right? In-memory tables, because SQL up to a point, you know, a couple million rows per second, you can stream that into SQL Server if your if your tables are memory tables, because they're fast, they don't suffer in terms of lockings and any of that. So that would work, right? For the same amount of rows, if you do regular tables like this one here, backed by temporal tables, so you keep a history of changes in case you need to go back in time. You have to do this thing in a sort of a batch way, because all the locking and the speed in SQL Server will break, right? You're gonna start having a lot of dropped messages in here because SQL really can't perform. Just a side note here for you to be mindful about is some people think like, if I go into SQL Server, Azure SQL DB in Azure, and I crank up the vCPUs, put all the way to the top, and pay like $30,000 a month for that instance there with tons of CPUs, SQL Server will run faster. And that is not the case, right? Azure SQL Database is designed for parallel sessions to scale up on the amount of people that can query the database in parallel. The actual performance of the database, the throughput you can have to the database, that is set on the level of the database on the database SKU you come to choose. So like if you do business critical, the SLA say you're gonna have a 2 milliseconds I/O to the data store, regardless of how many CPUs you assign to it. So that 2 milliseconds that goes to the database, and then you put on top of that all of the locking information, it can pay you $30,000 a month, but it is not going to improve on that particular aspect, right? So bottom line here is just to say that SQL database, they are an option up to a certain point, up to a certain amount of million rows, depending on if you're using business critical or hyperscale or general purpose, right? You have to work on the throughput for those options. All right, it went away. The other way to implement this thing here, that's more, this one here is a more more increased bill, right? It's for larger pockets. Is when you still, your event viewer is still your friend here to get the sensors in, and still have your discrete logic on an Azure function being called by this event viewers, and you still have your batch lane and your speed lane. But to go around that problem with a SQL Server in terms of locking, what we have in there is for the speed lane, Cosmos DB is one of your options. You can use Cosmos DB for that one, because Cosmos DB, the SLA of the product actually says that they support under millisecond response to retrieve data from the database, and therefore to accept it too. Sorry. So this will not bottleneck your streaming, but will consume a lot of your money, because you pay by consumption here. It's not a monthly bill, but it's by consumption. So if you have a lot of messages coming in, the bill here can be really, really high. And the other side, and the other alternative for for the batch is, instead of using SQL data like I mentioned before, we can dump straight into data lakes or blob storages, right? Either way, and bring that information into, well, here my slide is kind of outdated. I'm still pointing to Azure SQL Data Warehouse. This is the icon for Azure SQL Data Warehouse. This product has been rebranded, right, and expanded. It's a brand new thing. Perhaps that's a topic we can talk about some other day. I have some presentations on Azure Synapse, which is the product that came to replace Azure SQL Data Warehouse. So Synapse can come in here and process that information. In today's technology, actually, Synapse can connect straight either to the function itself or to the streaming. So, my code that would be in a function here could be straight into Azure Synapse and using either the SQL engine or the Spark engine inside Azure Synapse. So the speed lane here can be implemented in a different way with current technology. All right. So I think that's all. Yeah, that's my last one, and that's how you would get into enterprise levels. So Chris, any questions there?
I don't see any questions right now in the chat. If anyone has a question, you're welcome to speak up now.
So either the presentation sucked or I did explain things very well. Either way.
No, that was a cool presentation.
All right. So yeah, so that's all that I have for the day. This is how we creating the Power BI itself is pretty simple. The Power BI streaming data set. The art goes when you go into enterprise level to choose the right service levels to your formula. So then you can have insights and near real-time insights in your Power BI dashboards. Chris, back to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much.